Alright, so what I want to do today is look at beveling, channel box editor, and filling holes. Just three things. And then I'm going to give you a project where I'm going to give you a whole bunch of, I'm going to give you a Maya file with a bunch of stuff in it that you need to do. Opening apology. I feel like I'm kind of dying right now, so if I sneeze or cough or sniffle, I apologize, but you'll just have to get over it. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the bevel tool in Maya. It's really straightforward, pretty cool. All it does is really curve your edges and give you, instead of a really sharp corner, it's going to give you a much more curved corner. So I'm just going to come in and select all four of these edges up top, then come up to mesh and come up to edit mesh and bevel. And you can see what it does. It just kind of starts to keep the corners from being quite so jagged. If I come up to the edit mesh and bevel options, I can increase the number of segments, or I can increase the width of the bevel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the segments 5 and the width maybe 0.25 and say bevel, and you'll see right here it's a lot more curved than it was before, and it has a lot more segments in it. That's pretty much the bevel tool. It can be used for a ton of different things, but the bulk of what it does is just curves the corners. So if I select all the faces and say edit mesh bevel with that same setting that I just had, I've made a cube with curved corners, which is pretty neat, and it's pretty quick. One thing it does do is it can also often leave triangles here, which can mess up your edge flow. So beveling is usually something that I wait until the end of the project to do, just to kind of curve the corners, make things look a little less jagged. But it is important to know that you can bevel edges or you can bevel faces. And that's kind of what they do. The next thing I want to look at, we touched on last class a little bit, but we didn't, or last video, we didn't really address it heavily. So what I want to do is look at the channel box editor. So I'm going to edit mesh, and I'm going to bevel again, but then I'm going to open up the channel box editor. And what I've got is Polycube Shape 10, because I've made a lot of these. But under that, I've got Poly Bevel 4. And if I undo, you'll see I've just got Polycube 10. But once I select the faces and edit mesh and bevel, Poly Bevel 4 comes up. And this has a lot of different options in it that come with the bevel tool. And we saw most of them here under the bevel options. We have the width and we have the segments. We have roundness, and we just have a couple of other options that are kind of over here, plus a few new things. But what I want to do is, once you have the bevel complete, if you come to the channel box editor, you can select it and you can modify it. So if I come in here, I can change this to 0.5, and you'll notice it changes my object. I can change it to 0.1, and it changes it again. I can change my segments. That broke it. I can change my segments to 4 or 3 or 2 or 1, or I can change it back up to 5, and I can change the offset. The bigger the number, the higher the gap is. But what's really cool about this is if I don't know exactly what number is, I can just highlight the actual word. So say I highlight the word segments here, then I can come back into the middle, and I can hold down my middle mouse button, and you'll notice that it changes it to these 2 arrows, and I can just drag. And now I'm modifying my segments through just dragging left and right, and I can see how that affects my final product. I can do the same thing with offset. If it's at 0, it's jagged edges, and if it's at 1, it's pretty much a sphere, somewhere in between. I can get it to be exactly where I want it. And that's really the power of the channel box editor, is that I can modify things pretty quickly. Sometimes with the channel box editor, when you come in, you'll run into trouble. Like if I change these to 2, well, that didn't really hurt anything. Just made it bigger. If I change this, there we go. Now we've run into a serious problem. It does happen, but usually only when you're modifying the subdivisions of a cube, so you want to stay away from modifying these 3 numbers on your object. So there we go. We've got covered bevel, we've covered the channel box editor. And one other thing I want to do is freeze transformation. It's a tool where if I move my box over to here, it's at -10, -12 basically. But if I want this to be my box's default location, I can come up to modify and say freeze transformations. And now if I set my box to 0, 0, 0, it'll always be in this position. Sometimes that's useful, especially when you're using the duplicate special tool and you need to know exactly how far you want to move an object. You can freeze the transformations and put it at 0, 0, 0. So now if I moved it over to here, I know that I'm moving at 15 exactly, and then I can duplicate it and move it back to 0, and it's right in its first spot. Alright, so that's the bevel tool, freeze transformation. And another thing you need to know, we talked about moving the pivot point. If I move the pivot point way over here, sometimes that's going to cause a problem, right? I need the pivot point to be back in the center of the object, but it's really hard to get the pivot point directly in the center of the object. The easiest way to do that is just to come up to modify and say center pivot, and it'll put it right directly back in the center. And then I can move him to the middle, and I'm going to freeze his transformation so that he's right back where he started. Hooray. Alright, so that's the bevel tool. Covered a little bit of the channel box editor, the power of it, freeze transformation, and center pivot. Next thing I want to do is I want to look at just a couple of different ways to fill holes. And I know we've talked about some of these already. If you have 2 objects and you want to combine them together, you need to delete these 2 interior faces. You need to select both objects, mesh, combine, and then merge the verts. Mesh, merge, 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 and merge. Alright, and then you end up with 2 boxes and they don't have any holes between them. But we want to look at what to do if we have a box here, something modeled like this, and we end up screwing something up, so we have to delete this face. We need to come back in and be able to fill that hole. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do it. The easiest way, and you're gonna really like this, is say mesh and fill hole. Boom. And your hole's been filled and you don't have to worry about it anymore. A lot of times, especially if you have a high poly object or a really detailed object, that fill hole is not going to work. You're going to have to try something else. So another way to do it is to select 2 edges on the opposite side of the hole, and this really only works if you have really good edge flow, which is another reason to keep your edge flow perfect. But once you select those 2, you can edit mesh and bridge, and I'm going to turn my divisions here under the bridge down to 0, and what I've done is filled the hole. Bridge actually works really well if I come in and I have some edge loops around a hole. I need to fill this hole right here. I can select both of these and edit mesh and bridge. And I need 4 divisions, 3 divisions. And once I get that, then I can come in and just edit mesh and merge all these verts together. And then not only have I filled that 1 hole, but I've effectively filled 4 holes that were there on the top of this object. and it was really easy. Sometimes bridge tool doesn't work, the fill hole doesn't work, and you actually have to go through and do it manually. And the only way you can do that is by using the extrude tool. So I'm just going to select this edge right here, and I'm going to extrude it. And I want to move it out, and I need to move it, and I want it to be lined up perfectly with these edges. And we talked about this a little in the last video, but if you hold down the V key on your keyboard, then it'll snap to the individual edges. So I'm going to hold down V and snap it to there. I'm going to extrude, hold down V, snap it to there. Extrude, hold down V, snap it to there, and one more time. And then if I say edit mesh, select all these vertices, edit mesh and merge, then I've gone through again and I've filled those 4 holes. So that's pretty much the process I want to cover today, is just filling holes and the bevel tool primarily. And I feel like we've looked at them, everything we need to. If I select these faces here and I can bevel, and you see how that kind of starts to screw up there. It's not usually a good idea to bevel things on a flat surface. It can also often screw up. You only want to bevel things around corners so that it can create those curves that we want. And also, it's a bad idea to bevel corners that are beside one another, because it turns into something like that. If you want to bevel all 4 of these edges, you need to do them at the same time, so you can get that look like I just demonstrated. If you come through and do them individually, you're going to get a really weird effect. But again, beveling something I usually save towards the end of the project, when I'm just trying to smooth out all the edges. And I can get something and just bevel it and kind of clean it up so that it looks like that. I feel like I've talked really fast today. I'm trying not to sneeze on the microphone. If you do have any questions, you can always email me. But what I want to do right now is just look at the project that I'm going to give you. This is your 3rd project, I think. But what I've got here is, I've got this object, which is basically a circular set of fences. And I've created that, and what I want you to do is to come in and use the duplicate special and just duplicate this wall here, which is, I'm going to call it a brick wall, maybe a wooden wall, I don't know. But duplicate this wall, and I want you to just make it so that it pretty much fits around this entire set of fences. There's a really easy way to do it, but I'm going to leave that to you to figure out. But I will tell you, you need to move the pivot point and then use the duplicate special tool. So that's just the first step of the project, and I'll grade you based on kind of how it looks all the way around. And the other thing I want you to do today, and this is, like I said, I think this is the easiest project you've had so far. You kind of lose out on the creativity, but it proves that you know how to use the tools. I want you to come in and fill this hole here on this box, this top hole here. I want you to fill these 2 holes on this box. This object here has a lot of different holes that I want you to fill. This object basically has one big hole that needs to be filled. And this object has a few different holes that need to be filled. So the project is just to come in, fill all these holes on these 5 objects, and to make this wall here basically be circular all the way around the circle of fences. So I'm going to upload this file to Maya, or to Moodle, and you can download it and then modify everything and submit it back to me. And remember, when you submit things, when you do file save as, you need to make sure your drop down is on Maya ASCII. So I'm going to save it as project 03, put it on my desktop, and I'll upload this to Moodle for you. So So if you have any questions, you can always email me at acarricker7615@stanley.edu, or you can call me or just stop by my office. So that's it for today. Hopefully this will be an easy project for you, and we'll get back to it next week. Thanks.